Hi, David. How are you?
Good afternoon. Nice to see you, Stephanie.
Yeah, it's so good to see you. And I'm so glad to be over here and LinkedIn Live talking with you about your book. This is a really big day. So we're really excited to be talking about it in live time today on book launch day. But before we get in, and before I share a little bit about your book and ask you a couple of questions, I want to share a little bit about you for those who are listening now or in the future. And I also want to let anyone who is listening know that we would love to answer any questions that you have. So jot them down, put them in the comments. We are monitoring that and would be more than happy to answer here live. So, David, you and I have found each other on the lovely path of navigating and bringing books to life. I'm Stephanie. I am the founder and chief strategist of the emPowered PR Group. And we here at the emPowered PR Group, we love authors, we love books. We love helping authors market their books, and we have absolutely loved helping you do this as well. So today we're really pumped because I would have to say, you're one of my favorite historical fiction authors that I know. And I love historical fiction. I've fallen in love with it a couple of years ago, realizing that it's a beautiful way to learn something at the same time while getting an escape from reality and enjoying a little bit of adventure that maybe I couldn't have done on my own. So, David, let me share a little bit about you with our viewers today. You are the author of the Stanfield Chronicles, which is a series. And today we're talking about number 2 in that series. You live in Massachusetts. And what I think is really awesome, and I've learned this about you over time, is that you also have a love for sailing. And it's interesting because your book has that very interwoven thread throughout it. So you have a love for sailing, and you've lived and sailed off the coast of Maine for many years. Retribution is the second book in the Stanfield Chronicles series, and it is out and live today. And that is what we're here talking about. But I'm curious, and I'm going to actually flip the switch, and I'm going to ask you because your book is actually about the history of America and the colonial times and the pilgrimage and all this fun stuff. And yet, one of my favorite parts about you and we get to chat is your beautiful accent. And so I love that you have a unique perspective on all of this. Tell us a little bit about your past and how you actually came to live across the pond.
Mhm. I started life as a programmer in
Mhm.
1962 on computers that filled a basement and probably was powerful, not even as powerful as my watch. Um, and that progressed through many iterations in different countries, and I eventually ended up in the United States, working for a software company on Long Island called Computer Associates, and I left there in 1888 to run a company in Cambridge in Boston. Um, I left that in '95 and became involved in the philanthropic industry
Mm.
through my wife, who had, with two friends, they were, what do they call it? Elderly is the wrong word, mature students at a local university.
Oh,
Uh,
non-traditional students.
Non-traditional, well,
Yeah,
okay, Bradford,
non-traditional students.
Bradford College doesn't exist anymore up in Essex County. Uh, and through that process, worked with those two to form a community, Essex Art Centre, an art centre for kids in Lawrence in
Oh, cool.
Massachusetts. And I got involved with that after my retirement. And one thing led to another, and I started or founded with somebody else the Essex County Community Foundation in '98. I left that in 2000 and I don't remember what it was now, 2011, 2013, something like that. And the process really I went through was in being intrigued about the state of philanthropy generally. I'm coming from England, where it's at a very different level because you've got a very high level of social interaction from the government and local authorities. Here is less so, and the non-profit industry has to sort of fill in the gaps. But I found that talking to my colleagues in other parts of the country, that philanthropy, raising money in New England was considered to be something of a challenge.
Mm.
So I thought I'd write a thesis about why it was, after the years I'd spent, what, 20 years or something in the industry, uh, why it was and whether there was a way to sort of mitigate that in any way.
Yeah.
Um, and I started doing research. And of course, the first thing I did was identify that New England started life really in a slightly different way from other places with the arrival of the Puritans. And I assumed that the Puritans had something to do with the mindset about giving of oneself and not of one's wealth, and such like. Uh, so,
Ooh, that's a
um,
good quote. I love that what you just said. Give of oneself. What did you say? Give of oneself,
give of oneself, but
not
not of one's
not
wealth.
of well.
So anyway, the point of all this was that I started doing historical research. I love history. I've been fascinated by history all my life. And as I started delving into the research, I really I was shocked at how little I knew,
Mm,
how little my friends knew, who were American, with American education, well educated and everything else, how
yeah.
little they knew about the origins of the settlements in New England.
Yep.
And as I found out more and more, I started asking, well, why? Why was it? What drove this process of out of England to establish ultimately the settlement? And it was a fascinating history, compelling history.
Yeah.
So as I got into the process of writing down the historical narrative, I realized I was writing a textbook. I really don't like textbooks.
Mm,
And so I said, how do I convert this into a story? How do I convert this in a way that's more readable, more compelling, and is not the warts and all, but certainly tells it from a sort of a worm's eye view, at the ground level view, through a participatory process. And that's where I came up with the idea of creating a hypothetical or mythical, uh, a fictional character called Isaac Stanfield. I did a search to find out whether there was any other local Isaac Stanfields. And I came up with that name as someone who could observe what was going on, but participate in it as well. So it became a live action process.
mm,
And it just took off from there.
yeah.
I was so fascinated by the research that I spent, I don't know how many years, 8 years doing the research. And I just went down so many rabbit holes, and I got so many books, all the books behind me, and many others, and on Kindle and on Google Docs and God knows what. I couldn't stop. I mean, I became absolutely,
Like an
uh,
obsession.
yeah, I became fixated about the idea of what happens next. And it reached the point where I said, look, I've got to stop. I've written about 500,000 words, I think. Now, a typical book is about 80,000. And I thought, I've really got to stop and think this one through. And that's where, with help with editing, both family and
Mhm.
friends, as well as professional editing, I really had to bring it down. And that changed from being an historical thesis or philosophic thesis to an historical curriculum course, to being, in fact, what I would like to think is a compelling story about the historical events, but
Mm,
told by someone who I hoped would become compelling himself in terms of his coming of age and his story about coming out of England and what was happening in England, being involved in the maritime
mm.
trade, and what that did, and what it was like sailing in those days, and what the various conflicts were, and the intrigue that happened. That
So
resulted.
before you tell too much about Isaac, because
Yeah,
I am pumped for you to share a little bit about Isaac. I have to go back, if you don't mind, and
yeah,
unpack a little bit of what you just shared, because it's brilliant and awesome and proof of what what happens in the historic what could happen in the historical fiction writing space as
right,
the author, and what the reader will get out of it.
yeah,
When we first met, I remember you talking about this journey that you took to fall in to uncover this rabbit hole of excitement. You got uncovering things that we don't know. And the reality is, a lot of history has the potential to be subjective. And, depending upon who won or where we went, or what is in the textbooks. And some things don't always make it. And so what we think we know isn't always 100% in alignment with what actually happened. And as you started digging, and thank you for doing that, what you uncovered was other things that people don't know. And I, as a fundraiser, so my past world is on fundraising. Used to work in nonprofit and in fundraising. So when you talked about the philanthropic arm of you and how that became like a spur to you starting to go, why are we struggling here? Or what's our struggles? Or how do I better understand how people look at philanthropy? Who would have thought that this is where you would land, that you would be releasing a second book in a series that better explains America's history through the lens of someone from England, like from an English perspective. And I have not seen that angle ever. And that's just a really beautiful thing. But talk to me a little bit about the fact, before we get into talking about Isaac, did you grow up wanting to become an author? Number one, I have a feeling the answer is no, right? And that evolution. So here you were going to just write a thesis, so some information you were going to share. What was it like personally when you go, oh my gosh, there's this character out there that wants to be told now? I have to write a book. Like, what was that like? I'm just curious.
It was actually very interesting. I've talked to other authors who write, especially those that write in the first person. And I'm writing in the first person because Isaac is telling what's happening as it's happening. I want it to be immediate. And they've said that they aren't quite sure whether they inhabit the character or the character inhabits them. I found that when I sitting down and I was really getting into writing about Isaac, with the whole structure, the historical structure around me, I'd written calendars with the right dates and the right days of the week, but I'd gone back and looked and found out when the 16th of June in 1613 was, and I knew the day was a Wednesday or whatever it was. And inhabiting that and just writing. So, okay, today's Tuesday now. What's Isaac doing today, and what's happening? The beginning, early process was it was a day by day account of what he was doing. And well, what was he doing? And I said, yeah, Isaac, you're here. You're what's going? And he'd start writing, and I'd just be there typing in what he was telling me. And every now and then I said, well, hold on a second. This doesn't compute because we've missed a week or missed a day based on the chronological sequence. In fact, the early days, I sent a draft to my daughter, and she came back and said, you're missing like 2 months. Your date has gone from this suddenly to a month or so later. What happened in the meantime? And basically what it was is I'd come out of one episode and I'd gone into another episode without thinking. I'd followed on the dialogue without realizing that people were being dragged along behind in the story. So that was. But going back on the historical side of it, I loved reading history from a child. I mean, I've read the children's history books and novels written for children, and I love that approach. And I've done that all the way through. But I've written a huge amount. I mean, writing a historical thesis was just writing what was called like a white paper, because I did that in the computer industry for years and years and years, just writing about a new product or a new product area that needed to be discussed. When you sell in the computer industry, you're always selling a solution to a problem that people don't know about. So you've always got to identify the problem and I explain it in fairly simple terms. Here's the problem you've got. Oh, by the way, I have a solution for it. So it's that kind of approach to communication, interaction was something I was well used to.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting as a programmer how your brain is probably hardwired, helped you go down these paths of like, okay, well, I need to know that to do this had this and da da da, right? And that is that I can see take its own shape, which I think is a really beautiful thing. The other thing that I also think is beautiful that you just shared, and as an author myself, and have had the chance to work with other authors, you are living proof and a reminder that sometimes you plan to write a book, and other times the book has plans for you to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's like the book was saying, I have to get this out. Like, this is important to share. And you and I have had conversations about why books like this are important, right? Understanding history and where we've come from and where we're going. All of that's very interwoven. I would love for you to talk a little bit about that, about why you think um, history is important, but specifically historical fiction.
It's I've got to be a little careful here. When you're writing history, you're going through all sorts of tomes and sources of information, and you're writing a conclusion based on the analysis of other people's conclusions, and you're always trying to come up with something slightly fresh,
Yeah.
or very fresh, but it's very difficult, especially the further back you go. Uh, you've had you're climbing on the back of hundreds of volumes and hundreds of authors who all given their go at doing things. And in fact, when I started doing research, I was reading historical fiction, and it really was fiction about subjects that I was interested in. I was saying that's ridiculous. There's no way that could happen. And so I realized that if I was going to write in historical fiction, I've got to be try and stay fairly close to the truth in the process, because there's information available. You just need to know where it is. And of course, with the internet now, you can find out anything if you dig down deep enough. And I'm already in a situation with my books where I've had to come up with a pretty good reason why I've drawn conclusions that I've drawn, because they're not the conclusions that other people have drawn.
Mm.
And I've always got the fallback is saying, well, never let facts get in the way of a good story, or never let the history overwhelm the storytelling that you're trying to provide. But it is. I mean, I said, wait a minute, the conclusions that conventional wisdom about how such and such happened and what cause and the effect were and everything, that doesn't compute. I mean, it's like watching a sort of Agatha Christie, Hercule Poirot, and him say, "Well, no, oh, my grey cells, what's going on here?" And that's what I was finding. And for example, it intrigued me that everyone seemed quite happy that the separatists that are arriving in the pilgrims, as they're called, the separatists arriving in Cape Cod, thought they were going to basically New York, the Hudson River, but they ended up in Cape Cod, and that when they got to Patuxent or New Plymouth, there were some Native Americans waiting for them, who had been in England, having been taught to speak English and to be interpreters and guides and assistants, waiting to help them continue the process. I said, that's too much of a coincidence. How is that possible? And then I realized that an awful lot had been going on in England and various parts of England to make this happen. There was intrigue involved, and I felt there had to be intrigue involved for the Puritans or the separatists not to realize that this is what was happening, and they were just pawns in the game, as so that was compelling, fascinating, and I had to write about it. I wanted to participate and be on the ground when this was going on. So I had Isaac be me, going in there and asking the questions and watching the reactions and so on. So it was a sort of a very dynamic process.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And we have people who are watching live right now. Lori Caldwell specifically is saying, "I can't wait to read the books." And
Good.
so, yay! I know you're going to love them, Lori, and others who are watching. It'll be so much fun, and you are going to learn in the process. You're going to love it. You're going to learn the process. But the other thing, David, that I think we should share with anybody watching or listening later is how the book is written through a series of letters. Can you talk a little bit about that and about that
Yeah,
process? It's so cool.
that's actually quite interesting because it starts. Both books start with
Mhm,
letters.
mhm,
Uh, what I wanted was for Isaac, not just if he was going to describe something, he can't just describe it in a vacuum. He's got to describe it for someone.
mhm,
And so
mhm,
I found this real person called William Whiteway, who lived in Dorchester in England and he was born uh, at the right time. He was actually a year or so younger than Isaac. Um, and he was a real person who became quite a significant figure in the Dorchester history. But he also was a diarist.
mm,
I have a copy of his diary, uh, and he wrote summaries of what was going on nationally, internationally, and locally. But he wrote a history. He was a diarist. So I said, oh, that's wonderful. Then what I'll do is I'll have Isaac write to Will, explaining what he was doing. And then I thought, well, I can't go on just writing a letter. What I'll do is I'll get Will and Isaac to agree that instead of writing a letter every now and then, dear Will, dear Isaac,
mhm,
Isaac will just write a journal.
mhm.
And he'll write a journal explaining what he was doing and then send that journal on a regular basis to Will. And so Will becomes the sort of the repository for all these journals that are being produced. And Isaac and Will sort of lives somewhat vicariously through what he's reading about Isaac and comments on that on an occasional basis.
I love it. I love the vibe that that gives as a reader, but I also love that that could very easily be how they were communicating back
Mm.
in the day during that historical time. So it's just amazing. I'm just excited for today for you because Exploration, book number one in the series, it is already out. So if anybody is new to the series, go purchase that. It is available up on Amazon. You could also go to David's website, isaacstanfieldchronicles.com, to get Exploration. But today is the long awaited number two in the series. So without giving any secrets, because even though you know this about me, I read the last page of a book before I read the book.
Yeah.
I know it's awful, but it's totally how my brain works. It's awful.
Spoiler, spoiler.
I know. So I'm not going to spoil anything for anyone, but in, a few minutes or less, can you let readers know what what are a couple highlights that they'll get in Retribution?
Second book. Second book.
Yeah.
Uh, well, that,
You can share a little bit about book number 1 without giving book number 1 away, but
well,
a few things.
book one starts in August of 1613. Isaac is a young lad, and he accidentally gets involved with the start of a fire that engulfs most of Dorchester in England, and that
Mhm.
forms the basis for a lot of historical activity that Isaac participates in. I have Isaac actually directly involved at the seat of the flame, so to speak, and escapes, and he ends up being shoved off to sea to escape possible wrath, and becomes a seaman. And that brings in La Rochelle. It's a Huguenot town, and there's a whole history about trades with North America and southwest of England through Huguenot towns of France, which is one of the reasons when La Rochelle becomes a high risk place for various reasons I won't go into now. Uh, the people in England say we've got to find our own direct um,
Mhm.
uh, sources for the commerce that's coming in from North America. Now, one of the many reasons. Um, so
Mm.
that explanation and Isaac growing up continues through up to, in fact, all the explanations up to the point that Mayflower leaves Plymouth in England in September of 1620. So that first book is all about what happened in England and elsewhere that resulted in the separatists going off to Plymouth, New England, in the Mayflower. I won't go into any more details of whys and wherefores, but the second book starts with the Mayflower having just left, and Isaac picks up the pieces, so to speak. I won't explain what the pieces are, and he then goes. Oh, by the way, Isaac has been to New England a couple of times in that intervening period, 1620, 1613, 1620. He has all sorts of experiences. 1620, he goes back to New England for various reasons. And then various things happen. He becomes a successful businessman and trader, and that's explained, why it's explained. And then something happens which brings in Bermuda. People don't realize that Bermuda, in fact, is an offshoot of the Virginia Company, and was, in fact, the most successful of the trading companies between the Virginia Company and what became the Council of New England and the Dorchester Company and so on. All these explained in the book. And so he needs to go to Bermuda in order to resolve the situation. But while he's there, it gives him a chance to understand why it was that Bermuda was successful as a trading company and as a settlement, and that became a model, if you like, for elsewhere. And then he comes back, and there's other things happen, and it ends in 1628 with Isaac and company on the Abigail, which is the boat that John Endicott sailed in to come over here in 1628 to what was called, well, by then it was called Salem, Massachusetts, and that's the end of that book. And then the third book, which I'm plotting furiously, actually takes Isaac from the trip across, where I will be talking in great detail about the problems of a large group of settlers in a very small boat, spending 6 weeks in a boat in all sorts of adverse conditions at the end of the year. And then what happens when he gets there, and there are various sorts of activities going on. And that'll probably end around 1635.
So this is the beauty of what all you just shared. You're going to, when you read this book and the series, you're going to learn very interesting things, but you're also going to experience things like love and loss and struggle and pirates and adventure and lots of other
things.
Yeah, lots of important things that'll be a beautiful relief of your that's what I love about fiction, you know, a glimpse of jumping into someone else's life for a minute and enjoying the adventure, but learning in the process.
Right.
I was going to ask you what's next, but I think you just gave a glimpse. Book number 3 is in the works, huh?
It's in the plotting stage. I've got to start writing fairly soon, but I'm having so much fun, in fact, in getting the first 2 books. Actually, it's a lot of fun, but because it's new and it's different. But it's not productive for me because I want to write.
Writers want to write. I know.
It's sorted out, so I can go back to my keyboard.
I totally understand. As a writer myself, I love all the other aspects of what a book can provide, but I also absolutely love the solace and quiet and solitude of sitting at my computer in the dark. I like to write in the mornings when it's really quiet in my house and the sun hasn't come up, and just letting the beauty pour from me, right? Yeah. So I feel you and I understand. And I bet anybody who is listening now or later who are authors would agree. Okay. So if you are listening and you have fallen in love with David and his book series and Isaac, definitely go to isaacstanfieldchronicles.com. You'll see in the ticker below that there's a link to that. So you can go there and visit. Yep.
If you get a visit, you can visit there. You find out an awful lot about not only about the book, but the background, because a lot of the stuff I took out of the 500,000 words, because I had to cut them because it reduced the length, went into the website. But you can't actually at the moment order, as it says on the bottom there, the banner there. You can't actually order them from the website at the moment. You'll have to go
Sounds good. Yes. Well, it's live up on Amazon. So you can go to Amazon and you can find the book. And in fact, today we are really excited because we're watching all of the fun Amazon rankings happen as people are purchasing. So that's wonderful. But in addition, David, I wanted to acknowledge, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
One other thing.
Yeah.
I do have an audio version out now on Exploration, the first book, and I'm already working on the audio. I'm doing it myself, the audio for the second book. I'm about 6 chapters in, and I hope to get that done in the next month or two.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So yes, the first book is available in paperback, audio, and ebook. Second book is currently available in ebook and paperback,
Yep.
with audiobook coming shortly. And I also would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that you are a wealth of knowledge in this space. And for anyone who is listening and or knows organizations or groups or individuals who would be inspired by having David come speak to them, you're always welcome to share the message and to bring the message to a
Absolutely.
community or
Lovely.
group. Yep. Yep.
Mm.
So you would also just reach out to David. If you go to the website, you'll be able to do that directly. David also is available here on LinkedIn. You can follow him here as well. David, thank you so much for coming.
Delighted.
Thank
Absolutely
you
delighted.
for sharing your passion with the world,
Mm.
and thank you for giving your readers who like read Exploration and couldn't wait the what they were asking for, which is book number 2. And I know when they finish book number 2, they're going to be knocking on your door again saying, "Where's
Oh,
book
yes.
number 3? I need
Right.
it."
Yes.
I need it. So thank you so much for being a part of this. I'm so glad to have you here today to talk more. And if you need or are interested in learning any more, you go to isaacstanfieldchronicles.com. You will learn a lot of information that David just said didn't make it in the book. So these little Easter egg nuggets that you can dig in and learn more. Thank you so much.
Thanks.